Hello, and welcome to the Classroom and the Capitol podcast, where we explore the connection between decisions made at the California State Capitol and classrooms in Kern County and beyond. We'll speak with educators, lawmakers, and stakeholders to learn more about the process and take a closer look at how the Kern County Superintendent of Schools office collaborates with school district leaders and state representatives to ensure Kern County student voices are represented in Sacramento. And now, here is your host, Carlos Rojas.
Welcome, everyone, to episode number 3 of the Classroom and the Capitol podcast. This is the podcast where we do our best to dig deeper into the decisions that are being made at the Capitol in Sacramento, and more importantly, looking at how those decisions are impacting and implemented in our classrooms here in Kern County and how they impact our students here in Kern County. And for today, what we're going to do is focus on the May revise, which is essentially the second step in a 3-step process to develop the state budget. The first step being the governor's budget proposal in January. The second step I just mentioned is the May revise, and the final step is the enacted budget in June as a result of negotiations between the legislature and the governor. So as we dive into that topic today, we are fortunate to be joined by 2 of my colleagues who I have a ton of respect for. The first being joining us remotely, being Mike Fine, the CEO from the Fiscal Crisis Management and Assistance Team. And we're also joined in studio today by Jonathan Medina, the Assistant Superintendent of Fiscal Support here at the Kern County Superintendent of Schools office. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today. Appreciate your making time to be with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Good morning, Carlos.
So we're going to go ahead and jump in, and just so we give our audience a little background on who you guys are in case they don't know you yet, why don't we start off, Mike, with you telling us a little bit about your career path as it relates to education, the development of the state budget, and how you came to work on the fiscal side of education.
Well, I started out in defense contracting, and my wife was a elementary school teacher, and I thought, instead of working all these hours to get missiles out the door, that I could jump over and help her from her classroom perspective. And so that was my entry into school districts and school finance. And I spent about 30 years now in school districts as the chief business official, as deputy superintendent, as interim superintendent. And for the last 10 years, I've been at the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team, the last 8 of those 10 years as the Chief Executive Officer. And in our role, we kind of sit between the state and local districts, advising both on school finance policy and a variety of other related topics.
Well, you're proof that behind every good man is a better woman. We're thankful for your wife's influence on you, Mike, and bringing you over to education for us. Jonathan, same question for you. How did you get into this world of business and on the education side of things?
Kind of similar to Mike, other than I came from oil and energy. I was actually on a road crew doing inspections up and down the state, and there was a downturn in the state economy, and the best move I ever made was applying for the superintendent of schools office. I really needed to use my bachelor's degree. And so making that move to superintendent of schools, and I really haven't looked back. I've come to really love the work, continue to progress internally at KCSOS for a couple of years. And then I actually spent a short stint working as the internal account clerk for FICMAT, which was under Mike, actually. And it was there that I really got the desire to want to be a CBO. And so from there, I ended up moving out to a local district, Fairfax School District in Kern County, and served there as the Director of Fiscal Services for about 3 years or so before moving back here to the county office. And I've now been in my role as Assistant Superintendent going on my 3rd year now. And really in my role, again, absolutely love what I do now. Able to liaise between state entities and bring critical and timely information back to our current CBOs and district leaders to really help us craft our programs and craft our budgets in a way that aligns with all the legislation that's being enacted. So,
Right.
that's really kind of came to be.
Excellent. I'm really excited for this conversation today with both of you because I think the business side of education is a side of it's a conversation that isn't had normally unless you work in the field. The public doesn't really normally get involved on the business side of education, those conversations. So I think you guys can add a lot of knowledge and expertise into for our listeners today. So, well, excited to have you guys. Mike, discuss the role of FCMAT, if you would, please. Not only as it pertains to school budgets, but how does FCMAT get involved, if at all, with the development of the state budget, and kind of just talk about that process and what your role is as the CEO of FCMAT.
Okay. As mentioned earlier, we are an organization that kind of sets in between the state and local K-14, so school districts, charter schools, county offices, and our community college partners to both give advice to those local educational agencies, but also to assist them specifically with challenges they may be facing on the financial side. Fiscal is usually how we refer to it. We also assist them with governance issues, issues around operations, matters involving special education, and a variety of topics. But we are a state agency, or a unique state agency, created by the legislature in the early 90s for the role I just in part described. But we are housed through a contract between the state and a local county superintendent. In our case, it happens to be KCSOS. So my staff and I are all employees of KCSOS under a contract with the state. We have a role and a relationship with state policymakers, the administration, the legislature, and a variety of state folks where they turn to us for advice as well. If we do X, what will be the impact locally on a school district? What's working, what's not working at the local level? And we give advice regularly. We craft trailer bill language that goes to support the budget. In fact, quite a bit of trailer bill language in this year's budget has come from us. And we assist policymakers in better understanding their decisions and their considerations of various policies on local educational agencies. Our primary duty that we were created for was to assist districts in fiscal distress, but over the past 30 plus years, we've really shifted that to the idea around prevention. Preventing fiscal distress is the best solution, right? If we can keep a district or a community college out of fiscal distress, then we don't have to deal with the crisis that the legislature created us to deal with. There's a whole nother piece of our organization that we do that we don't talk publicly too much about, but it has to do with data management. So we facilitate the systems, we write the systems, the programming code, monitor, manage staff help desks for a variety of mission critical systems in the state dealing with school districts. So all data collected on students and teachers comes through applications that we develop and run and support, and all financial data that is reported from a school district up to its county office of education and then up to the state goes through systems that we have developed and host and operate all under contracts with the California Department of Education.
Is that all you do, Mike? That's it?
Yeah. Well, there's a few more things if you want to hear about them.
You know, one of the things that I've experienced and I've learned being a former teacher and a former administrator, actually being in the classrooms and now doing this role in governmental relations, is, you know, what happens at the Capitol, discussions that happen at the Capitol are theory, really, right? And then what happens in the classrooms is the practice. So having someone like you, Mike, and your organization, FCMAT, be at those hearings in Sacramento to kind of give some credibility or reality to what happens with their decisions when they're implemented at the practice level is really helpful. So we appreciate your work doing that. Jonathan, same question for you. in the division of fiscal support, I know you have more of a local focus compared to Mike. Can you talk about what the mission is of your division?
Yeah. So the mission of fiscal support really is just that, to support our local school districts and charter schools in really any way possible that we can that really relates to fiscal, financial operations and things of that nature, including the budget. Under that same legislation that FICMAT was created, county offices, again, received additional responsibilities, primarily fiscal oversight. So now we're that local first level to assist and prevent districts from entering fiscal crisis. And again, beyond that, just statutory requirement, a lot of the focus of what we do is we really try to go above and beyond to help our school districts. Again, we have 45 districts plus additional charters, and at any moment in time, we can be called on, to assist with additional fiscal reviews, go in and do, assistance on site if needed with our districts. But we try to have a bench of prospective CBOs that at any moment in time there could be a vacancy. So we try to backfill those to minimize the impact on students locally. And one big thing too is that we have on our external team a group of district fiscal analysts. And one of the requirements of those positions when being filled is that those individuals have to have served in a CBO capacity for a district so that they know what it's like on the front lines. They know the issues, the struggles, the challenges that all our districts face, and they're, again, uniquely poised and able to help all of our districts navigate their issues at any moment in time. But again, it's just a small part of what we do. Again, we have internally focused departments, but specific to this in the state budget, that's what our external department does and how we support districts.
Excellent, yeah. And it sounds like both of you really do take the preventative approach before the districts get into those issues, fiscal issues, and that's definitely the right work being done. So let's dig a little bit deeper into some of the specifics in the May revise I mentioned earlier. Mike, for you, Proposition 98, and for those of you who aren't familiar with Proposition 98, it was a voter-approved initiative back in 1988 that establishes the floor funding for education, K through 14 education. Mike, in the May revise, what we see is the 25-26 Proposition 98 being revised down by about almost $4.5 billion compared to the governor's January budget proposal. Can you elaborate a little bit on what kind of led to that downward revision and expand on any guidance or advice you might give a district as they prepare for the 25-26 budget year?
Sure. So Proposition 98's one of these complex pieces of, actually, as you've described, Carlos, an initiative by the people. Written by somebody and then put before the voters, and they passed it. And as often is the case, those are not perfect. And so it's evolved since 1988 in various forms. But in simple terms, Proposition 98 breaks the state budget into two pieces. We have the total state budget, then we have the Proposition 98 portion, which funds K-14. So our TK through 12 schools and school districts and charter schools, and then our community college partners. And then we have the non-98 side of the state budget, which funds health and welfare, funds law enforcement at the state level, funds California Department of Forestry, fire services at the state level, and a whole variety of state services and supports. So Proposition 98 defines, based on the amount of state revenue that comes in from personal income taxes that we all pay, corporate taxes that our corporate partners pay, and sales and use tax, the state's share of the local sales tax or statewide sales tax. Those three, we call those the big three taxes. There are a lot of other taxes, but those are the three that are predominantly unrestricted and go to general state operations, including schools. So Proposition 98 in its current form for next year that starts July 1st is a straight percentage of those revenues, roughly 40%, just a hair under 40%. So if out of our paycheck each month, we see that we've contributed X dollars to state income taxes, that's personal income tax that we all pay and is withheld from our check. just think about it that 40 cents of that dollar, so if we pay $1,000 a month in personal income tax or $100 a month in personal income tax, then $40 of that $100 is going to K-14 education. What's going on between this fiscal year that ends on June 30th and next fiscal year that starts on July 1st is state tax revenues are dropping. And they're dropping for a variety of reasons, including a slowing economy. They're dropping because in the last several months, we've had a fairly volatile equity market, stock market, basically, that influences capital gains taxes, which California is highly dependent upon, and a variety of other threats to our revenue streams, including some of the proposed tariffs at the federal level and a variety of other policy and economic influences. And so the forecast for the revenue for next fiscal year is lower than it was in January. And thus Proposition 98's share of the state budget, while it remains at roughly 40%, it's 40% of a smaller number. And that's why we see a downward turn in total Proposition 98 funding between January and May. However, the state has put some proposals to put some measures in place that soften that blow to schools and colleges for next year. And that includes using some reserve funds to make up part of the downward adjustment, and to a very complex item that we call deferrals. But basically the state says, we owe you $100 next year, but we're not going to pay you that $100 till the following year, but you get to count it at the local level next year. So for all the CPAs out there and accounting folks out there, you would know that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But we have laws here in California that facilitate that happening, so that schools don't feel as much of that downward adjustment in the immediately next year. And the hope is that things will improve and that we can soften that adjustment over time. Ultimately, the state will have to balance things out, and we will, if the trend stays moving downward, then we will eventually feel that at the local level at some point in time. Our advice to school districts specifically is to be conservative at this point, to ensure you are funding your core programs, that you are building adequate reserves, that your county office, Jonathan and his team, monitor for eventual downturn and softening that blow at the local level. There are specific proposals in the May revise that we are not recommending districts budget for at this point, that we would recommend they revise their budgets in August or September, well, August, basically, to incorporate those items, because we think they are risky items until the legislature's actually adopted a budget and the governor has signed off on it, which will all happen by the end of June. But school districts need to actually adopt their budgets before that. And so there are a few items that we would recommend they not include just because of the risks associated to them over the course of the next roughly 30 days. As far as long-term is concerned, there are other implications on our districts. One is declining enrollment. We are funded based on attendance. When we have fewer kids enrolled, then our attendance levels are lower. And so many districts, in fact, every region of the state is experiencing declining enrollment right now. So school districts are, from a year over year kind of comparison, they may actually get less money in the following year than they do in the current year, simply because of declining enrollment, having fewer kids. The other thing that we have going on that you read about every day in the newspaper and on online media is lots of changes at the federal level. And some of those changes are known, they've been acted on. Some of those changes are unknown. They are proposals, some would call them threats, to adjust funding specifically for education. And so we have those unknowns, kind of that little bit of a dark cloud out there of uncertain exactly what federal dollars would be cut. Federal dollars for California schools accounts for about 10% of their revenue, roughly. Each district's a little different in how much it shares in federal revenues, or how much it depends on in federal revenues. So we have a bottom lines, we have a downward trend from this year, which was pretty robust, to next year. But the state is mitigating some of that with some technical adjustments and some other policy kinds of approaches that we've taken in the past when we've had an economic downturn. And then we have some of the unknowns around federal policy changes and funding changes. And then we have this ever-present trend in declining enrollment. And the declining enrollment is purely, it's not purely, that's not a proper way to describe it. It is predominantly driven by lower birth rates. Families are having fewer kids, they're delaying having kids, and school districts, especially with transitional kindergarten, are some of the first public services and public agencies to feel a decline in birth rates, because we serve kids early on, but certainly at age 4 and 5.
Thank you, Mike. So once again, we're joined by Mike Fine, the CEO of FICMAT, and by Jonathan Medina, Assistant Superintendent of Fiscal Support. Jonathan, something that Mike just touched on, I want to kind of elaborate on a little bit, and you guys can both correct me if I'm wrong on characterizing it this way. But in my review of the budget over the last 4 or 5 years of the budget development process and the way California has handled some of the economic downturns, there's been this, for lack of a better term, a kicking the can down the road approach, and from my perspective. And one of the things that we're seeing is within Proposition 98, the governor a couple of years ago proposed, or last year proposed, a Prop 98 maneuver. There was a suspension of Proposition 98, which is constitutional, I believe in 23-24. And now Mike mentioned the deferral this year that's included in the May revise of $1.8 billion. So Jonathan, if you would put your district CBO hat on, with that information, what does a district CBO do with that information? What do the conversations look like? Who do you talk to? What planning or preparation is done at the district level?
Yeah, at the district level, we really kind of take this budget, and again, we're thankful that education was largely spared. So we, again, continue to plan as if, again, we're going to be fully funded as outlined by the May revise. But we also have in our back pocket is realizing if state revenues do decline as they're projected to, what's our plan? Cash is going to be a very big issue. Cash is still king, and if you run out, then that's game over. So making sure that our emphasis on cash flow is really, really high this year, especially because we're coming off of a time when there were significant federal dollars that had come down as a result of the COVID crisis. So this is now getting back to a reality where, cash deferrals can start to have an impact if state revenues don't materialize where they're projected to. The first place the state will go likely is to additional deferrals. Again, we've seen the state in recent years defer all the way back from January to June cash. And again, for several districts in Kern, we're able to weather that storm and manage our cash, because our budgets are set up well. But there's other districts where we need to be very proactive in understanding exactly what the inflows and outflows of our cash are going to be. And if we do need to borrow, we need to be doing that and getting all of our ducks in a row ahead of time, because that's not just a process that happens at the flick of a switch, something that takes a lot of planning and takes several months to get into effect. So that's some of the big things that I'm seeing with this budget and what we would need to do to be proactive. If our district should be planning to, if there are budget reductions, plan for a percentage of LCFF reductions. And again, through the reduction plan, really keep those any proposed reductions as far away from the classroom as possible. So those would be things like travel, discretionary spending, again, would be paused or reduced. Facilities and operations projects, things that are not absolutely essential, again, would be paused or reduced. Even OPEB contributions, again, paused or reduced just until the state's able to right their ship and when we can get the district budget back into an operable state. So those are some things that come to my mind of what I would be planning for at the district level. I'll pass it to Mike. Do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I think you captured it. We talk a lot about budgets. The law requires that local school boards adopt a budget by July 1st each year based on reasonable assumptions and projections of the revenue we're going to receive, so the money we're going to receive in, and what it's going to cost to deliver services, the money we're going to pay out. For a typical school district, 85% of their budget is tied to people. So Jonathan identified a number of things that districts could adjust downward, travel, use of consultants, things like that. The reality is those add up to pennies in the total scheme of a district's budget. Beyond the 85 cents spent on people, which you don't, under the law, we cannot change or reduce overnight in response to a sudden event. Beyond that, 85 cents, we have utilities. If we don't pay our utility bill, then the power gets shut off. We have transportation costs maybe that we're contracting out for. We have services for our students with disabilities where we may not be able to have the ability or the capacity to deliver a specific service that they need. Thus, we contract out with somebody to deliver that service for us or to serve that student's educational and needs. And so there's very little a district can do to make immediate adjustments, which is why good forecasting, good projections, good budgeting, as Jonathan's alluded to, are critical. So we talk about all that all the time. What we don't talk about very often is what Jonathan raised, and that's the cash. We all understand cash better than we do budgets because that's how we live at home, right? We have a paycheck, we know what it's going to come in each month, and we know what our expenditures are and what we're going to pay out each month. And it's no different than a school district. And when the state talks about deferring payments, what they're saying is, we told you we're going to pay you $100 in January and $100 in February and $100 in March and April and May and June. And what they're telling us right now is they will allow us to count that $100 in June, but they're actually not going to pay us. They're going to wait roughly a month into July and pay us. And as you can imagine at home, if your employer said, I can't afford to pay you this month, even though you've worked, I'm going to pay you 3 weeks late, there's an impact. We may struggle to make our mortgage payment or our rent payment. We may struggle to make a car payment or to buy food because our paycheck was held and delayed for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. That's what we're talking about here. And the state has this mechanism in place to allow it has this mechanism in place in lieu of actually cutting our funding. They just say, we're going to keep your funding at the level we promised it or that we're obligated to send to you, but we can't quite afford it in that period. So instead of cutting it, we're going to delay it. And in this particular proposal that's in front of us right now, they would be delaying it about 3 weeks.
Yeah. You guys characterized that perfectly, and that's probably my biggest concern with what I've seen over the past several years in the budget development process is not being able to afford what we're trying to currently fund. But as Mike, you mentioned, and Jonathan as well, there are mechanisms in place to help the state deal with that. This is a conversation about the state budget that has so many different tentacles, and so we can go on so many different roads of this conversation. But I want to thank you guys both for your time today. We might have to do a part 2 of this episode because there's so many more questions I have, and I think more information that the listeners would be interested in hearing. But for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. I can't thank you guys both enough for the work that you guys do and the expertise you bring to the conversations. And ultimately, the title of this podcast is where my heart is, and I know your heart is as well, is how those decisions at the Capitol impact our classrooms and our students here in Kern County. So again, thank you for your advocacy on behalf of our kids. And I might be reaching out to you for part 2 of this episode. Thank you both very much.
Great. Whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Classroom and the Capitol podcast. Join us again next time as we continue to explore the connection between decisions made at the California State Capitol and classrooms in Kern County and beyond. Production facilities for this podcast are provided by KETN, a service of the Kern County Superintendent of Schools Office.